everybody, it's Amalia, and today we'll be working with the Not Too Shabby Box of the Month. And the project for this video is going to be centered around a masking technique. I'll be using Farm Friends and Farm Life Scene Builder to build an entire scene for an A2 card. I'm cutting down my Nina Solar White paper to approximately 4¼ by 5½. The first thing that you need to do is figure out the placement of each of your stamps. So I'm grabbing each of the stamps that I'm going to use for this particular scene, and I'm sort of auditioning them in the different parts of the card. One thing I can tell you is that the first things you need to stamp are the things that are going to be in the foreground. That's in the very front of your scene. And then from there, you'll position the stamps that need to go in the middle ground, that's in the middle or behind the front. And then the final is the parts that are going to be in the background. First got the box of the month. I knew I was going to do this technique, so I took out all the stamps and I stamped them onto some masking paper. Then I fussy cut them all out and I put them in some little baggies behind the stamp set, so I have them ready to do this project. Unfortunately, and you're going to see right here, I stamped the images on the wrong side of the masking paper. So they're not going to work like masking paper. But I'm going to make it work, and I just grabbed some double-sided tape and stick some double-sided tape on the back. I'm at the point here where I've kind of figured out where I want everybody placed, and I'm pointing at the pig because I know he's the center of the foreground of the scene. So that's who I've got to stamp first, but I know that he's going to have some friends next to him. So I'm bringing out his friends, I'm putting them in place, and I'm making sure also to leave space between each of them, like they're not going to be too close to one another. And that's going to be important because when we place the second row of animals, we want to be able to see portions of their lower body. So we're going to fit some of them in between where you can see space on the front row. I have my first images set exactly as I want them, so I'm just going to ink them up and stamp them on my paper with my stamping tool. Polymer stamps are very sticky, so I'm making sure I have my magnets in place so that when I stamp my image, it doesn't pull up the paper. Now that I've stamped the first row, I need to place masks on the first row images to cover them so that when I stamp the next row, you won't have a stamped over image. It's going to protect it from the next row of stamped images. And I'm actually doing some auditioning. I'm taking the masked images and I'm just placing them in different areas just to see what it looks like, to make sure, I've got everything in the right place before I actually stamp out the images. So I've got my masks on the front row. Now I'm placing my stamps where I decided I wanted them to go. And since I want this next row to be a little bit closer together than the previous row, I can only stamp one image at a time. You can see that I've masked off my horse and I've placed the cow into position. I'm adding a goat into position as well as a little sheep. Because we've used masks, all of these new images are going to be placed behind the original images. I've inked up and stamped the images. Now it's time to remove the masks, and you're going to see the magic of masking. I decided I needed another animal between the cow and the sheep, so I masked up my cow, my sheep, and that little chick, and I stamped a little donkey there right between them. Next, I want to place my tree in the scene, and so I'm going to mask my little sheep, and I'm just going to use the mask that I had for the tree to say, okay, this is where I want the tree to go. And since it's going to go a little bit off the page, I need to move it over a little bit so it'll stamp correctly and not have to go over the edge of the stamp tool. Also wanted to mention, in case you were wondering, the blue masking paper is from Inka Dinka Doo, which is no longer in business, and the white one is from Amazon, and I will find it and put a link below. I decided to go with the barn instead of the windmill, so I've got my two images masked so they don't get stamped on. Sometimes when you're stamping over masks, the image skips a little. You need to make sure that you press firmly, and this is what happened here. So I'm just using a Sharpie marker to go over some of the missing lines, and you won't see it when it's done. Now I got some ink where I didn't want it on my panel, so I'm just taking my Mono Multi sand eraser, also known as the gift from the crafting gods, to erase that ink. So that's how you use masking to create a scene on your card. Here's what the final card looks like. If you want to see how I colored the tree and the sky, just keep watching. I'll insert the clip right here. I've taped down my panel with some washi tape. I have some water and some watercolor brushes because I'm going to be using my Faber-Castell watercolor pencils. I hardly ever use them, but I didn't want to watercolor this and I didn't feel like Copic coloring this, so I'm going to use the watercolor pencils. Watercolor pencils work very simply. You sketch out your pencil and then you use a little bit of water, and the water makes the color sort of melt and bleed together, and that's exactly how it works. I started on the tree first because that was the easiest thing to start on. And I've taken two different colors of green. I'm just doing C shapes and U shapes and backward C's to scribble on both of those colors to create texture. I take my number 4 watercolor brush from Black Velvet, and I'm dabbing off the extra water so that it's not too wet, but the tip is wet enough that it's going to melt all that color together. And every time I dip into the water, I have to dab it off onto that paper towel. I'm using Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock. This is not watercolor paper, and as you see, I'm touching my paper to see it's already bowing a little bit. That washi tape is helping to keep the paper straight, but the added water is going to make the paper kind of bow. So I really need to be minimal on how I had my paper, had my water, and you'll see that when I do the sky, I actually dab the paper towel onto the card to keep it from getting too wet. I used a brown and then a grayish brown on the tree trunk just to give it color, and then the grayish brown is going to help with giving it maybe some texture. The lines really disappear when you add that water, when you brush that water on, but the added variation of color helps with making it look a little bit more textured. I grabbed all of my blues, but I really only used the lightest blue that I had to color in my sky. And I'm going to color in big swatches of blue and leave some space for clouds. Sometimes I'll outline a cloud and then fill in the spaces between the clouds. And other times I just leave a blank space and there's my cloud. Very soon I'm going to have to make the decision about where my horizon line is going to be. At first I was thinking the horizon line is going to be at the bottom portion of the page so that I had a nice big blue sky, but that will leave my tree and my barn hanging off, floating in the middle of the sky. So I have to make my horizon line about a third down from the top. And so it's the perfect place. My barn is going to be grounded, my tree is going to be grounded, and nothing is going to be floating in the sky except my fluffy clouds. So I fill in my horizon line, and then I want my clouds to be a little bit more defined. So I grab one of the grays that I have, and I just draw very thin lines at the bottom of the clouds. Now I'm using my brush that is just slightly damp, and I'm melting all of the blue color with my brush, being careful not to go over the white spaces so I don't cover up my clouds. The watercolor pencil really worked out well for the sky and for the tree. I did have some issues with the coloring of the animals, and so I don't show you the coloring of the animals, and you may not notice it in the final piece, but they came out really great for the sky and the clouds. I'm melting those shadows that I use that gray for, and it really helps define that sky and give it a real sort of character with those clouds underlined with the gray. Also at the end, and I don't show it to you here, but I do add an additional color to the tree just to give it a little bit more texture and definition. And you'll see that in the final piece when I'm done. Here's a close-up of the card. You can see the green that I added to the branches of the tree. I'm not crazy with how I colored the animals, but that sky is giving me Claude Monet vibes. Folks, you can find the 2 stamp sets that I used in the Not Too Shabby box of the month. The box contains 2 6x6 paper pads. This is Farm Life, and this one is Farm Sweet Farm. There are 2 paper pads, 6x6, 24 pages, 4 of each design. Then you get 2 packs of ephemera. Each one matches each of the paper pads. And you'll get 3 stamp sets. This one is Farm Friends, and I used almost all of the animals from this particular one, as well as the sentiment which says Happy Birthday from the Herd. The second stamp set is called Farm Life Scene Builder, and I took the barn as well as the tree from that one. And the third stamp set is called Happiness is Homemade. These are 3 great stamp sets that you can do some beautiful scene building with. I hope you enjoyed this video. I appreciate you. Please click thumbs up and leave a comment below. Bye!